So when you think about traditional trade barriers, these have always shaped the business strategies of multinational companies. How they enter markets has been very much determined by trade barriers. And Brexit is a good example now. Companies are really thinking about what impact Brexit is going to have on their businesses. In the digital economy, these digital borders will play a similar role. They will shape the strategies of businesses, multinational businesses, how they structure their global operations and how they enter new markets.
So what do these digital borders look like? Well, the best example is China, which since the early days of the development of its national internet has taken a particularly robust approach to cyber sovereignty. And by that I mean the willingness to apply their own laws to the internet as accessed by its citizens. And China has achieved this by a mix of regulatory and technical measures, which over the decades has resulted in a substantially different internet in China, with different information accessible to internet users, different players, and indeed a different legal and regulatory environment. But China is not the only government that has embraced this strong sense of cyber sovereignty and data localization. India recently passed a law requiring all data relating to payment transactions to be stored within India. Russia has a particularly strong data localization requirement. If you provide services to Russian citizens based in the Russian Federation, you basically have to keep that data on servers in the Russian Federation. And taking that logic of cordoning off the national internet from the rest of the world, it was recently reported that the Russian authorities have experimented with literally disconnecting the Russian internet from the global internet as a cyber warfare defense measure.
There are three themes we're seeing in this area. One is digital protectionism. Investment control regimes are increasingly becoming focused on technology and data. CFIUS, for example, in the US is increasingly focused on Chinese investment in the technology space. The second trend that we're seeing is around increased concern about data privacy and individual privacy rights and consumer protection. So in the EU, for example, we had the GDPR that came into force last year, and that imposes territorial restrictions. And this will also have an impact on the movement of data between in and out of the EU. So the third trend that we're seeing is 5G and the race for 5G dominance. And this is beginning to play out in the political landscape, particularly with the trade war that's going on between the US and China.
So I'm going to focus on 5 particular areas of regulation that can really create barriers to trade, digital borders that companies need to understand when they're transacting internationally. The first is investment control regimes. CFIUS, the United States regime, whereby deals involving a foreign buyer are reviewed in case there is a sensitivity around national security, is the best known example. But many countries have similar regimes. They are increasingly moving towards including data within their scope. CFIUS, for example, was recently updated by the PHRMA legislation that includes businesses that maintain and collect sensitive personal data relating to US citizens within its scope. The second one is data localization laws. These laws that require businesses to keep data in servers located geographically in that particular jurisdiction. These are the most direct barriers, the most direct constraints on the geography of a transaction. You want to enter into a jurisdiction that has strong data localization laws, you're going to have to establish locally. You may have to have your servers locally. You may have to register with the authorities, get licenses, etc. The third is data privacy laws, and obviously there's a big and complex body of law in the European Union and indeed in many other countries. But they really go to the viability of a business internationally. We've seen cases where changes in, for example, the anonymization requirements of certain sensitive data can result in a business model that was viable one day, not being viable the next. Understanding what the constraints of privacy laws are on the business is crucial to understanding whether that business is going to be viable in a particular jurisdiction. The fourth point is that Beyond privacy and data localization laws, there are actually a lot of other ways in which data is regulated. For example, in China, research data itself, whether or not it contains any personal data, is subject to specific restrictions on export, for example. And it's not just specific type of data, it's also how businesses handle data that may be the subject of regulation. Cybersecurity laws are a big one. If you have a breach and the data of your customers is compromised, you may have to report to the authorities in a jurisdiction and the consumers in that jurisdiction. Famously, a lot of these regimes have a very extraterritorial effect, which adds to the complexity. And finally, there's compulsory data sharing. That refers to governments requiring businesses to share certain information with them. For example, you may have customers in a particular country and the authorities approach you and say, this person is accused of a crime, you're going to have to disclose all of this data about that person to us. And that can be a tricky situation. Reputationally, not all businesses are going to be comfortable with being subject to this kind of order in certain jurisdictions. Even legally, you might find yourself caught between a rock and a hard place where the laws of one jurisdiction say don't disclose and the authorities in another say you have to disclose. That is 5 examples of regulatory regimes that can create very real digital borders that impact on the structure of an M&A transaction.
So in 2019, digital borders are the front lines of the world's defining geopolitical rivalries. Understanding and adapting to this increasingly fragmented landscape is key to successful deals. To start with, you need a data strategy. Have a data strategy. Map the data regulations and understand their impact on your business post-acquisition, as this might also impact the value of the data you're acquiring. Understand the political and antitrust issues that might arise, because digital borders also tend to creep in through the antitrust regulations. Think about the cost of compliance post-acquisition. If you acquire a business that is reliant on data flows between jurisdictions, think about the cost of integration. You might need to shift some data to a particular data center, or even build a new data center, or get a new cloud provider. So think about these issues and the cost implications for your business.